Everyone can't live forever. Where would we put them? Why do you think there are time zones? Why do you think taxes and prices go up the same day in the ghetto? The cost of living keeps rising to make sure people keep dying.
In Time is a movie that was both ahead of its time but also undercooked for what it tried to deliver. So for those that need a refresher, In Time is a movie that takes place in an alternate universe where time itself is the currency. In this world, you basically live with no worry until you're 25 years old, then a clock appears on your wrist, showing a year counting down. Now if that clock on your wrist were to hit 0, that means you die. But like I stated earlier, time is the currency here, so people work for added time in their clock and pay for things with that same time. You can also share still time from people by twisting their arm with your own, and if you were to die from other causes, your clock will just black out, meaning nobody can take whatever time you had left on your wrist. And for those wondering on how they pay for things in this world, there are devices that are used that can transfer time to and from someone's wrist, kind of like their version of a credit card swiper. Oh, and also once your time starts at 25, you no longer age physically. In this movie, we follow the story of Will Salas, an average Joe living in a lower class district with his mom. And yes, the districts in this world are split by class, referred to as time zones. They had little details like having them constantly check their wrists, which would be the equivalent of someone low on money always checking their bank account. There was also a moment where a worker at Will's job was laid out from his time running out and people around were just moving along like business as usual. The women in this movie also walk around with wrist covers as well, which obviously is to hide their clock. This movie took a turn when one of the richer class people named Henry came down to this district and was buying everyone drinks at a bar. Now this would seem harmless on the surface, but we soon find out that this world's version of police are called timekeepers, and their job is, you guessed it, keeping time. And to them, keeping time is as simple as keeping the districts as broke or as rich as they're supposed to be. Supposed to be being quote unquote, because as you might guess, this world is layered with unfairness. So as Henry is buying drinks, Will comes over to let him know that he's essentially poking the bear being in the ghetto with all that value. And of course, not soon after, some goons show up to clean his clock, but Will was able to help him escape to safety for the night. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we get the conversation between these two that changed the whole movie for me. In this convo, we get our first look on this view of the world from the eyes of one of the wealthy, because at this point, all we got were those from the ghetto. He explains how at a certain point your mind is shot even though your body is still physically intact. He explains to Will and all of us as the viewers how the whole system is set up to have the wealthy live forever while the poor people die every day, and it's justified from the fact that if everyone was granted a fair amount of time, overpopulation would occur. It's in this moment where we start to really see the parallels between this world and our own. I mean, I could spend a whole separate video going over them, but I'm sure at this point you guys can think of a few yourselves. So anyways, the next day Will wakes up to check his clock to realize that Henry gave him all of his time. We then see Henry looking over the edge of the bridge to get one last view before his clock runs out. Now, like I said earlier, Will has a mom, and his mom is finally on her way back home, but as she gets on the bus, she realizes she can't afford it because the price went up. She looks around to see if anyone can lend her some time, but everyone dismisses her because time in this world is both currency and literally your life's countdown. So she attempts to run to meet Will, and just before she can make it, her clock runs out and Will's mom literally dies in his arms. But after this is when the movie kinda goes a little bit downhill and just had a few cool moments. Essentially after this, Will dedicates his life to stop the system in place and goes to the most wealthy district. Here he treats himself a little, meets one of the most wealthy men, bags his daughter, gets found by timekeepers, kidnaps the daughter back to the ghetto, she falls for him again, and they basically become the Bonnie and Clyde of this world. Now, like I said, there were some cool moments, like when we find out the leader of the timekeepers was once a kid from the ghetto who found a way out and now is trying to make sure nobody does the same. We also had an interaction between Will and the thugs who call themselves the Minutemen, and here we learn that the timekeepers are fully aware of them stealing time from people but let it slide because the Minutemen only steal from others in the poor time zone. And boy, did that have some parallels to our society. And I guess that's my issue with this movie. It just feels like throughout the film they're giving me blue balls. And to be honest, I can only ask for so much from a single movie, but it doesn't make my heart any less sad that this concept has yet to be fully explored and fleshed out in a TV show. Because that's ultimately what I want. Another movie won't do it for me. If you get the right writer behind a concept like this and we have a potential for a hit. A show I love but I think doesn't get talked about enough is The Leftovers. I'll do a review on it at some point, so I won't get into it too much, but in that show, 5% of the population disappeared, which is about 400 million people. And in that show, the whole vibe of it has this very ominous in tone to it, but not in a scary way, more of a sad, depressing, uncomfortable way. I think that an in time show with the vibe of The Leftovers would be incredible, but I think we're a ways away from that. Anyways, to get back to the movie and wrap it up, it's still really good. Like I said, after Will Moms dies, it takes a bit of a nosedive, but moments still happen to keep you invested in this world that's being shown. The acting was good. I wouldn't say anybody is given an Oscar performance, but movies don't always need that. I can't really remember a cool shot that stuck with me, but the music being used here was weirdly perfect. Because in this movie, most of the people were dressed up fairly nicely and it takes place in a city, but the music felt as if it came straight from an Egyptian film or something, but in a weird way it works. So overall, In Time for me was a respectable B+. The concept alone is an A+, but I couldn't give it anything less than a B, but man did this movie half execute some things. It's still a solid movie though, and I would say it's actually going to age better with time, which is rare for a lot of the movies that came out during this time. So that is going to do it for the review. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. As far as why I chose this movie specifically at this specific time, there really isn't any rhyme or reason why. It's just one of those movies that I've always loved and I've always kind of wanted to talk about. And now that I have this channel, I have an opportunity to talk about it. But until my next one, as always, peace and light. Remember to eat your veggies.